All right, thanks again for joining us today. We've got a few items on the agenda. We're going to kick off with Monica's going to walk through. You can see in the agenda around Slack channels and Google Group alignment. Then we'll go into sharing our second half GitLab field enablement priorities to review some slides we recently shared with the CRO leadership team. And then also just a brief overview of a new process for how make it even easier to submit requests for field enablement needs, requirements that you have. So Monica, you want to kick us off today?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen and show an issue that is linked to in the agenda. Sorry, I look like a tomato. I got a late workout in today. So, all right. So here is basically what I wanted to walk y'all through today was a proposal to map our Slack channels and Google Group naming and attendance conventions a little bit closer together. So the problem being, as many of you know, right now there's no standardization across like how we name channels for managers, who's in them when we're talking about like across Slack and across Google Groups, which are effectively email distributions. So basically this effort is to again drive some standardization across those, so it makes it a little bit more intuitive to use, you know, the sales manager Slack channel and the sales manager email distribution list. You know who you're getting mostly when using those. So I won't walk y'all through all of this. I welcome you to kind of walk through this issue and look through it a little bit closer. But I wanted to walk you through the changes briefly today and, you know, just vet your feedback, your opinions, make sure that you thought this was a good change, a good iteration, and not adding too much onto your teams. The hope is that it drives some more clarity, again, in communicating with managers specifically. So quickly, the proposed changes, we're essentially going to add more Google Groups. So again, when we say Google Groups, that effectively just means email distributions. And as we don't use email that much, this would basically be for like calendar invites. You know, if you needed to quickly set up a meeting with managers above, it would be that. So we're going to add more Google Groups. We're going to consolidate and refactor some of the existing Slack channels that exist for managers, and we're going to add a few new ones again so that we hit those levels, and I'll walk you through those in a second. One of the bigger changes is I'd like to propose basically creating Slack groups. So if y'all aren't familiar or as familiar with Slack groups, that's effectively a good way to mention a group of people within Slack. Sorry about that. Make sure y'all can still hear me.
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. So it's effectively a good way to mention a certain group of people within Slack. So right now we have, I believe, an @sales leaders, but it's not up to date. It doesn't actually mention the sales leaders. We don't define like what does sales leaders mean, ASMs and above, who is that? So we're adding a few more of those, and it's effectively a way to CC a group of people within Slack and make communications a little bit easier. I think the key out with that is like we want to make sure that those aren't overused. You know, here mentioned for those groups of people, so we want to set really clear parameters around and when those are not used. And then all with Katie to actually standardize this process moving forward, add it to access requests so that it's not a manual process, it's kind of an automated process and less room for error. Obviously, we'll add guidance to the handbook, telling people kind of, again, how to use these channels, everything like that. So consolidating all of those channels, this is what essentially the proposed landscape would look like. So we have our Google Groups here. You'll see this is where the bulk of the change is, where you see these new groups, and you can kind of see the attendance in those. So we have sales leaders. We also have an equivalent match for CS leaders, and then we kind of go down the group. We have managers, CS managers, all of that. Slack channels, it doesn't change too much. I want to slightly rename our leadership channel to sales leaders, just again to keep standardization. You'll see like the naming conventions are the same all the way down. The main thing here that I want to point out is field manager. So now I believe we have a sales, it's a public sales managers channel, and I want to make that private, because I looked at it and it's not really used by anyone so I don't think we'd be compromising transparency by making it private. And the reason being, we've had multiple instances now come up in the business where we want to give managers and above a heads up on some kind of news that's coming out or something that they need to prepare their teams for, and there's not really an effective and efficient way to do that. So this would have solved that problem without adding yet another channel, just repurposing one that already exists. And then moving down into Slack groups, again, this is a big pretty big change here. There's not a lot of these Slack groups now, but you can see you know, what these groups would be, who would be in them. And so, you know, if I needed to get a hold of, you know, only enterprise managers for something, I could say, you know, leave a message and say add enterprise managers, and everyone in that group would get a ping, again, effectively CCing them on Slack. So that was a quick run through. I didn't want to take up too much time going through this. You're welcome to look through the issue. Kyle and Ryan and Sakamoto have taken a look at it, so thank y'all for looking at that. But I really wanted to open it up to this group and get your feedback, as this will affect you and your teams. So I'll leave it there for any questions or comments.
Hey, Monica.
Yes.
Did you define the difference between when we say field versus sales?
Yes, that's a good point. That is, I need to do that, and thank you for reminding me. So, and Ryan, let's talk through this a little bit here too, because what I mean when I say field, in my head, it's sales and CS. So when we say, let me share my screen again. So here, when we say field managers, like in this Slack channel, so this would be field managers. So this would be managers across sales and CS. So that's kind of the rationalization in my head when I'm saying field, is kind of both of our groups combined. And there's a need for obviously just the sales team or just the CS team. So that's kind of the intersection. Does that fair? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just would, if we have that definition, I think that helps. And then I think there's probably some room, I know this is cross-departmental, to have where it's frontline managers, including SDR managers. If you think about like enterprise SDRs, and
very good point.
I think there's probably something in there somewhere.
Okay. Yeah. No, definitely a good point. I'll look into that, and I'll make sure that field definitions. I know that's not just confusing here; that's confusing everywhere, and we kind of use them interchangeably. So I'll make sure that that's defined somewhere very clearly in the handbook. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
There aren't questions about Slack. I have a tangential question. So I see you're starting to leverage Google Groups. And what we're running into in public sector is some access controls around the G drive. And what IT is telling us is we should be using shared drives, and they can be managed with Google Groups. And I'm just curious if that's come onto your radar at all, if that's something you're looking at as well.
That's an interesting point. It hasn't come across my radar, but I'd be happy to look into it and see if that's something that we need to kind of standardize at a wider level. So if you want, Jim, we can take it offline and connect on that. I'd be happy to build some standardization into that as well.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you, Monica.
Awesome.
And if you think of other things, please, thank you, Monica, for including links in the agenda so you can find those and comment in the issue or hit up Monica. I'm sure she'd welcome your input.
Yep. Yeah, and David, sorry, one more comment. I'd just say that since, you know, if y'all do have any more feedback, yes, please leave it in the issue. I'm going to start activating on this and getting it going with Katie, just getting these groups kind of created. And so you might see some movement in Slack channels and things change. So if you have any feedback, or if we do these changes and you're like, this didn't really help, or it kind of hurt in this regard, like, please keep the feedback coming and let me know. The idea is that this makes the communication process much easier and doesn't add, it shouldn't add any additional burden. It should lift burden, in fact. So just please keep the feedback coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. I see some posts too. Hayden in the chat window said, yeah, positive changes. He's in favor. And yeah, you got a new nickname, Tomato Face.
I love it. I embrace the tomato face. It's 90 degrees here, people. It's 9 a.m. Give me a break.
Oh, I don't miss, yeah, Texas heat in August and September.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. And as I mentioned, this is a few slides that we shared with McBee and team recently. And knowing that, look, there's a real capacity constraint when we talk about training. We want your teams engaging with customers, right, and selling. So we need to make sure we're not over-indexing on too many, too burdensome of a request for time to sales training. That said, we are committed, and we look at what should be the commitment. We believe, and McBee is on board with this as well, is saying about 2.5% of your time devoted, or the individual contributor's time on average, devoted towards investing in professional development and growth. That 2.5% is about 1 hour a week. Now, it's not always going to be exactly 1 hour a week. There'll be some where it's a little bit more, others below. But that's our commitment, is to say is generally we're kind of trying to make sure that the request isn't more than that. So as we look at where we want to focus and to really prioritize those things, because there's a constraint not only in terms of what you and your teams can consume from a training perspective, but also a capacity constraint in what we can produce. So we wanted to establish some guardrails of, like, this is really what drives our prioritization, looking at things that we can do to drive efficient, predictable, and methodical growth. And more specifically, that item number 1, really working with you all to identify what are the things that are going to have the biggest impact to drive incremental ICV and ARR, right? What are the skill gaps and the behavior gaps to close that will help drive desired results? Second and third are also important, but it's around, we want folks to, want intrinsically to invest the time in developing themselves, not something that, it's because Ryan said you had to, right? Or McBee or us said you had to. So we want, we've got some working with Monica and others to begin an internal communication campaign around tapping into that intrinsic desire of culture of curiosity, culture of continuous learning. And then a lot of the great things that Monica's doing and the rest of the team as we think about sales kickoff, QBRs, ensuring that you all are well informed with timely updates. So when we look at, all the requests that do come in, it's a lot, right? And we know, again, back to those capacity and creation or content creation constraints, we can't do all of these things. We certainly can't do all of these things well. So it goes back to what are the things we really want to focus on to drive desired results for you and your teams. So these are just a sampling of some of the myriad of requests, right, that we get, that we look at. We can't act on all of them, but you have our assurance that we look at all of these and we figure out, all right, from a relative prioritization standpoint, where should this go? And so Kelly's working with Ryan, right? Eric working with Pyle and the RDs and team, et cetera, to help prioritize those. So what are those priorities? So this is our prioritization framework. Kind of the tier 1 priorities are those CRO level initiatives. So there are 3 CRO OKRs this quarter that have enablement implications. There's some effort around competing with Microsoft. We're continuing to build out the role-based field certification program, which will launch next quarter. And then you'll start to see some alpha courses to get your feedback this quarter to help finalize and inform those. And then also there's a McBee request of doing a lightweight assessment to test our knowledge in the field of product features, tiers, and how that aligns to use cases. So in the process of working with the product marketing team to build that out. And always continuing to operationalize command of the message and MEDPIC. So I didn't mean to read this. So then in terms of tier 2, right, we also know that there are certain things that are super important to Ryan and the commercial sales team. Likewise for the enterprise team and the others you see represented here. So these are some of the additional priorities that each of the different teams have determined, like these are also areas of focus for this quarter. And then last but not least, at the bottom, there are some additional things that we're working on that do require effort and focus that aren't necessarily in those top buckets, but things like weekly meetings to implement our learning experience platform, SCO planning, we're already in the throes of that. So a number of things listed there. Let me pause before I transition to Eric and Kelly to get into a little bit more granular details of what do these, the enterprise sales calendar, enablement calendar look like and the commercial sales enablement calendar. Any questions so far? All right, let's go to, we'll pass it to Eric. This is a first kind of iteration of trying to show a calendar view. We welcome feedback of like, how can we make this more consumable, more user-friendly, more intuitive? Eric?
Oh, thank you, David. Looking at this for the current quarter, we've got the following enablement activities coming up. We've got 3 lunch and learns. This is specifically directed toward EMEA. I'm working with Robbie Byrne on those right now. We're going to launch the first one tomorrow morning, and it's going to be the Command of the Message Refresher Lunch and Learn. It'll be about 30 to 45 minutes, and it's meant as a refresher for that. And then subsequently, each month after that, we're going to do an account planning lunch and learn. Robbie's going to be involved in that in the account planning tool initiative. And then finally, end of October, early November, another 30 to 45-minute lunch and learn around custom deck creation. So that's kind of how we're saving time with the field, where the lunch and learns seem to be highly beneficial to them. It's something they really like to use as a way to consume training content and kind of get tactical strategies and ways to apply it very quickly and use it. Secondly, we've got the DevSecOps use course, case course running currently. So right now we're at about 78% have run through it or going through it. And we have about 30% completion for our enterprise sales currently. And that's going to wrap up at the end of September. And then after that, we're also this week, we're going to launch the first alpha course of Applying DevOps course. And that's going to be a combined e-learning and then also a practice pitching exercise built in. And that's in order to get it ready for formal delivery in November. So I'm working with Isaac on that currently. So we're probably going to debut that early this week and then look around for some alpha testers for that. Currently, we also have the manager certification, and we have 5 enterprise managers in there and then 1 commercial enterprise manager, and we're running through that. We're hopefully going to wrap that up end of next week, this week, next week. And then we're going to have 2 formal virtual learning sessions on the 15th and 16th of September. We just finished a quick start a few weeks ago, and we're going to launch another one at the end of September, early October. And that's kind of what we have going for at this point. And also, along with the account planning tool initiative, we're working on requirements with sales outcomes at this point. And we plan to have requirements nailed down by the end of this month, and then go into the tool selection and implementation over the month of October to try and hit a launch date of early November to get it up and running for, first launch. So that's it for me, David.
Thanks, Eric. Any questions for Eric?
I love this slide. Do we have it as an epic roadmap, whatever, in GitLab?
We do not today.
And you don't need to. I was just curious. Like, it'd be an easy way for me, as a salesperson, to demo to somebody. That's all. You don't have to do it. I'm just.
Aspire to get there at some point.
Next year, you're fine. Don't worry about it.
We put it on a Peloton path for you, Adam.
I love visuals. This was helpful.
All right, I'll pass to Kelly to talk about the commercial sales roadmap.
All right, well, Adam, you're going to love this visual too, because there's even more content on this. So a lot of you folks have seen this before. Basically, what I'm focusing on is the required 7 certification. It's a commercial sales certification path. My hope and the cadence that I would love to create in a perfect world is 2 weeks to take a course, 2 weeks to practice, and then following that, some sort of reinforcement and incentivization. We'll see how that actually plays out in the real world, but so far it looks like I'm on track. So in August, we launched our first effective meeting hosting. So that's kind of, we're looking at some sort of bookends in between the required 7. So meeting hosting was just setting you up for an effective meeting so that your customer has a really flawless, seamless experience with their GitLab seller. And then we're going to progress into account ranking. We'll do some reinforcement. So each month you'll see a release cadence of the R7, and then with some really structured supplementary learning. Selling services workshop is going to be one of those pieces that's really important to kind of bubbled up as a priority. I was hoping to get that out in September, but making sure that the salespeople aren't overwhelmed, to David's point, I'm going to probably move that closer to the beginning of October to make sure that we give it the love and care and feeding that it needs to be really powerful. And that's pretty much what we have planned between
August and January, just a constant release of each one of the R7s. And then in between that, we're going to be launching our learning experience platform, which is super exciting because then we'll even have more options around content delivery and creating an engaging learner experience. And then while all of that's going on, I'm also working with a cohort to make sure that our SCO planning breakout sessions are really meaningful and impactful in whatever mode of delivery that ends up happening. Any questions around this or comments?
One comment. Love this, Kelly.
Thanks, Helen. I
Looking
appreciate
forward
that.
to executing this with you and the rest of the commercial team.
Well, we've had some really positive feedback around the effective meeting hosting course. You know, the goal is to keep these short, bite-sized chunks of consumable information with reinforcement activities that are actually wrapped around your everyday work so that we don't increase that load, right?
Awesome. Thank you,
All
Kelly.
right. Yeah, you bet.
There are some additional slides in that deck, but I'm not going to cover them here. It does get into, you know, what is effective training. So if you're interested, love and welcome your feedback as you look at there. Some key things that we keep in mind as we are building out these different learning experiences to be engaging. And as Kelly mentioned, you know, bite-sized, consumable, and ideally integrated into your day-to-day work, because that's really where the learning happens. It's only a very small percentage of learning happens in a formal setting. So a lot of what we do is learning from others and learning on the job, and there's application exercises. Next, want to, we mentioned this in the field flash that went out yesterday, but just wanted to highlight, let me share my screen one more time. We wanted to make it, you know, even easier to submit requests for enablement needs that you have. So in the handbook page, thank you, Monica, created, so at the very top of our homepage, if you go to field enablement, sorry, hold on a second. Yeah, in our overview section, it says, hey, if you have, you know, do you want to chat with us, you can Slack us here, or if you've got a request, this quick request process will take you to down this section of our page. And we've created an issue template that's already pre-populated, where we ask you to give us as much information as possible. And what we'll do when we get it, we go through a triage process that will actually, Chris and Kelly and Eric and team look at that to determine, one, kind of the priority and status of, is this something actively working on or something put on the backlog. So the issue template, we'll just take a quick look, automatically populates with, you know, asking for just some background of, hey, what problem are we trying to solve? What's the impact on the business, the intended audience, target segment, etc. So we'd love for you to, you know, test this out, give us some feedback. Happy to continue to make this as easy as possible. And then for us to be transparent back is that we'll, you know, reply back to let you know how we're assessing this in terms of that triage and where, like, what are the next steps? Is it something we, you know, we can do now, or something we look to do in the future? Any questions there? Or team, anything you'd like to add to that? All right. There are just a few other async announcements in the agenda. Encourage you to look at, including, please do encourage your teams to check out the monthly field flash newsletter. Lots of good content in there. And that one, latest version just came out yesterday. All right. Any last questions?
Real quick, David, I learned in a one-on-one with Monica yesterday that there will not be an August field flash because we're moving from the month prior in review to the month that we just stepped into. So if you're hitting refresh, hoping for that August field flash, just know that it was shelved in the spirit of iteration. And so September is the one that dropped yesterday. Great job.
We figured we could give everyone a free month. It's 2020, you know, everyone just gets a pass for a month.
Thank you.
Are we,
Thanks, Tim.
making,
That's a good reminder.
are we making up for that now that we get the pile dashboard every day email? Is that the trade-off? I'm teasing.
There you go.
That's the McBee dashboard. That ain't mine.
Oh, sorry, not the pile. Sorry, it isn't.
That ain't mine.
Sorry, I didn't mean to blame you for that. But yeah. Sorry.
Don't put that
I'll
on
take
me.
his paycheck, but not the dashboard.
There you go.
Well, have an awesome rest of the day. Thank you for everything you do, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
Summers, Eric, and Kelly. Thanks.
Thank you.